All right, good morning, all. Appreciate everybody signing on online. We have a couple people in the room as well. This is a new facility, so bear with us if we have any logistic issues. We're running a lot of the meeting off Wi-Fi. As you recall, this is a follow-up to our discussions in October. Based on sort of the reaction at that meeting, we're trying to put this in your hands, and we're going to guide you through a series of discussions to come up with hopefully a recommendation for Old Tampa Bay that we would forward on to the Nitrogen Management Consortium. Michelle, I don't know if you want to say anything as co-chair. Should we go ahead and try to introduce everyone again? Or
I do think introductions would be useful so we all know who's there online.
All right, we're going to start in the room and then I'll call you out online. We're going to do a quick round of introductions. If you don't mind saying your name and your organization, and we'll try to move through it as quickly as possible. I'm Ed Sherwood. I'm the director of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. Welcome to the meeting this morning.
Michelle Duggan, Pinellas County Utilities.
Marcus Beck, Senior Scientist, Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
Blake Simmons, Environmental Social Scientist, Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
JC Day, Pinellas County Environmental Management.
Sarah Kessler, City of Clearwater, Public Works.
Drew Boylston, Pinellas County Utilities.
Rachel, ESA.
Ilya Balcom, Duke Energy.
And we're going to move to the online folks. I have someone that says Zoom user online. If you could state your name and organization. We'll move on to Dave Glitzberg.
Good morning, David Glicksberg with Hillsborough County Environmental Services.
Nicole Polio. Nicole, you look like you're unmuted, but we don't hear anything.
Did you say Nicole Maloney?
There was a Nicole Polio, but go ahead, Nicole.
Okay, well, good morning. Nicole Maloney, Pinellas County.
Vicki?
Good morning, Vicki Parsons, Bay Soundings.
Alex Manos?
Good morning, Alex Manos, Pinellas County Environmental Management.
Carter Barrett?
Barrett Carter, Geosyntech Consultants.
Chris Anastasia?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Chris Anastasio, Southwest Florida Water Management District, swim program.
Heather Maggio?
Good morning, Heather Maggio with the City of Tampa Staff and Mobility Department.
Good morning. Kevin Miller?
Hello, good morning. Kevin Miller, City of Largo Environmental Services.
Miranda Anderson?
Miranda Anderson, Department of Environmental Protection.
Ben Ross?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Ben Morales, Water Quality Evaluation and TMDO Program with DEP.
Roger Johnson?
Good morning, Roger Johnson, City of St. Pete, Public Works.
I have a user that says Samsung SM-S901 cell phone. Not seeing them come off mute. So Sarah Napier?
Hi, good morning. Sarah Napier, Pinellas County Environmental Management.
I have another user, TMCMI.
Tanya McMillan, City of Lakeland Water Utilities.
Good morning. Vanessa B.
Good morning, Vanessa Bazo, Florida Department of Agriculture, Office of Ag Water Policy.
I believe that's everyone. If I missed you and you would like to announce yourselves now, please go ahead.
Good morning. I think I was the phone user. This is Rachel Vitek with RES, consultant for DOT District 7.
Great. All right.
Ed, this is Joel Johnson, FDOT District 7. I might be
Zoom user,
You look-
but I'm trying to fix that.
Yep, you look like the Zoom user. Thanks, Jill.
All right, well, thank you everybody for making some time in your day to continue this conversation, which has been going on for more than a year at this point in time. So really what we're trying to do is move this conversation beyond sort of the places that it's been sort of hovering at over the course of the past year. So we have been talking about this at a variety of different meetings, and today really the objective is to eliminate some of the options that that the majority of folks find to be unacceptable. We continue to sort of hear ideas pop up, and it's unclear sort of where the majority is falling with respect to some of those ideas. So the idea here is to sort of narrow the options and not to continue to revisit the same options that there really isn't broad consensus around. So we want to sort of narrow and eliminate some of those acceptable options. If possible, our goal is to really see if there is consensus and the ability to identify a preferred option moving forward. And ultimately, the intent is for us to be able to develop a recommendation so that we can present this information to the full consortium at the meeting on December 9th. If we're not able to come to consensus, we won't be presenting anything other than reporting the results of this discussion, because the full consortium, I think, has made it clear that they're not interested in weighing in until y'all are able to come to a consensus point. So this meeting is really going to be pretty structured to address these objectives that are laid out right here on the screen. So I'm hoping that there's consensus both online and in the room that these are reasonable things that we think we can accomplish today. And I am a clarity seeking individual, so I'm trying to provide that for this meeting as well. So I want to really be clear about what the estuary program staff role is in this meeting. We have presented a series of recommendations and findings to you over the course of this year-long process. And what we've heard is that those recommendations so far have not been acceptable to you. So today we are not proposing a recommendation to this group unless you request one from us. Our role is to listen to you all and to reflect back the group consensus that we are hearing. Is that acceptable to everyone? What we will do as staff is offer considerations for each of the options that we're discussing to make sure that everyone sort of has a level playing field about how they understand those options. And we will continue to provide process stewardship. We are the ones that are working the decision framework and the reasonable assurance process for you. It is not simple, not easy, and there are nuances to it. So we will provide that sort of process stewardship. We'll also remind you sort of next steps and the things that we've committed to as a group. And so I've already sort of talked to you all that today we're trying to articulate or find the consensus in the room that we can share back with the full consortium. And I want to be really clear about what we mean when we say consensus. We are using the voting protocol, the decision memo that the consortium has accepted in the past. So we mean a simple majority of the folks present in this meeting. I'm hopeful that that definition is shared and accepted by all of us. A simple majority of all the folks present at this meeting. I'm seeing some nodding in the room.
Who's the missing?
There are many entities missing, and that is something to be aware of.
I mean, I feel uncomfortable if it's something, if we're gonna, if the what's the word I'm saying? Regulatory management, change in that regulatory charter. If we, based on just who's here today, say we're going forward to that as a recommendation, I don't know that I agree with leaving the people who aren't sure out. But I don't know if you could do like an online voting just to make sure if it's something that's going to be a regulatory implication. I think everyone should weigh in on it, not just the people who are here.
So I think that is a fair consideration. And I think that what we can do is let's see how this meeting plays out, and we can see if it's necessary to sort of open up a poll after the fact that is clearly, shared and discussed with some of those entities that have a stake and an interest in the old Tampa Bay segment. I'll also sort of from a process stewardship standpoint, remind you that whatever is decided today is not actually a decision, right? This is sort of reflecting the consensus of the old Tampa Bay stakeholders who are present here, which is a fair consideration. And then ultimately actions that are codified into a decision memo or, a decision memo is not always an actual decision. A lot of times it's just a defined process for getting clarification from all of the interested parties involved, including the regulatory agencies as well as the stakeholders. So I don't think any actual decisions will be made today, but what we will do is sort of set us on a path for how to structure decisions that may come that might eventually have a regulatory implication. So I think it's a fair point. I think we can address it, but I also think we can sort of proceed how I've described laying it out so far, if that's acceptable to the folks in the room and the folks online. Are there any feedback from the folks online that needs to be considered?
No, I was just typing in the chat. I'm going to have everyone put their names and affiliations in the chat so we have a record of it. Just from a quick look, I think I did not hear anybody from Oldsmar, Safety Harbor, Pinellas Park, or McDill. Those would be the only entities not represented. And was there someone from Pasco? So that'd be the other one.
So from you all, what we're asking for at this meeting is a reminder that your entities have made commitments in the Declaration of Cooperation. And so we're asking you to demonstrate fidelity to those commitments that you've made to this process. We want to make sure that the folks that are speaking have the authority to act or represent your organization's interests. It's, now we've been through this. Now it's not the time to say, I don't have the authority to act. You should have been able to work this through your channels, and you should either have been empowered or had the person who is empowered so that you're ready to represent that position, that interest here today. And then we're also asking you, this is my request, please, can we frame all of our comments in the affirmative? What should be done? What are you willing to do? We understand what is undesirable, what people don't want to do. That is important information. We're not discounting it. This is a day about moving forward. And so if you can take care to try and frame your comments in that affirmative, I think it will be helpful in framing a more productive conversation for today. So it's been a minute since we did adopt the Declaration of Cooperation, and so maybe some of you read it all in detail, and maybe everybody didn't. But there's a couple of things that I do want to just make sure when I ask you to demonstrate fidelity to the commitments that your organization has made. There's a few things that I want to make sure you're really clear about that are in that Declaration of Cooperation. First is that Declaration of Cooperation did commit to producing an addendum to the Reasonable Assurance Plan. In fact, it committed us to do that in 2024, and we're late because science took time and the consensus is taking time. But that commitment is one that was expressed in the RA addendum. And it also commits everyone to identify and implement projects that address the nutrient load reduction goals of the Nitrogen Management Consortium. So those are things that you all and your organizations have committed to as part of that Declaration of Cooperation. The other thing I sort of want to remind everybody is, like, yes, we can all have different positions on some of these things, but it's really important to sort of remember the guideposts that we've set up for ourselves. And so the guideposts that I've been trying to, the lens through which I've been viewing the science that's been produced, is based on sort of a summary of the consensus interests that we all heard from you when we had one-on-ones. And we had those one-on-ones with every entity that has an interest. So Pinellas Park, McDill, Oldsmar, Safety Harbor, these conversations have been had with everyone, whether they're in the room today or not. And those interests that you all have told us that we're trying to be true to are that the marginal condition of Old Tampa Bay is something that's not acceptable to us as a region. We also heard that regulatory requirements are needed in order to generate political will to address the condition of Old Tampa Bay. There's a strong preference to avoid reallocation. And then there is general support for alternative management strategies beyond just nitrogen load reductions, but things like causeway alterations, managed flood conveyances, and oyster restoration. So I understand that we've presented a lot of evidence over this time. We've had lots of conversations. People have had to sort of grapple with some of the how the evidence and what they initially expressed as an interest. Pardon? So these interests might have changed over time. And so for now, what I'm suggesting is we keep these interests in mind. And if we need to reevaluate that some of these interests might have changed, I think that's something that we can discuss today. But I'm sort of asking us all to evaluate the options moving forward in line with these interests, which everyone has sort of articulated at early and often through the process. So guideposts, that's where we're at. So the way that I kind of approach this is I try and make what I view as the easy decisions first, and I hope this works for you all as a group. But there's a couple of questions that I'm hoping that we can work through, and we'll share a Mentimeter slide so that everybody sort of can have quiet feedback first, and then we can sort of see what the results are and see if there's items we need to talk to or if we're all generally aligned on approaches. But based on the meeting we had back in October with the Old Tampa Bay Working Group, there's a few things that relate to sort of the timing of how we make these decisions and also the vehicle that we're using to sort of codify these decisions in. And so I want to convey to this group sort of the options that I've heard proliferated over the course of this project. The first option is the one that we initially came up with in the 2022 Reasonable Assurance Plan update and was also in the Declaration of Cooperation. And that was this idea that we would be recommending a path forward for Old Tampa Bay in a reasonable assurance addendum. And we will do that. I think at this point, we initially committed to doing that in 2024. At this point, I think the realistic timeframe is to do that before December of 2026. So over the course of this next year. So from a timeline perspective, try to get it done in the next year, and it would look like being included as an addendum to the reasonable assurance plan. Okay. The second option that we've sort of been kicking around is, it's taken us longer to do the science. It's taken us longer to gain consensus. So perhaps we wait until we just produce the next regular reasonable assurance plan update in December of 2027. So this gives us 2 years to work through all the process, and the vehicle then would be not to produce a separate addendum, but to just incorporate this in a section of the regular reasonable assurance plan due to the department and EPA 2027. This was the staff recommendation that was presented at the last Old Tampa Bay Working Group meeting in October. And then at that Old Tampa Bay Working Group meeting in October, there was an alternative that was proposed, and that was to wait until 2032 when we had a better perspective on the kinds of projects that were being pursued and the funds that were available to do them. So this would be that we would give ourselves another reasonable assurance plan cycle and then another reasonable assurance plan cycle so that we would be charting our path forward in December of 2032, and we would do that through the 2032 reasonable assurance plan update. So these are the options that we have been talking around over the course of the past year. And I would like to get some clarity about where the folks in the room and online are landing in terms of which of these options is acceptable, which of these options isn't acceptable. So we have a Mentimeter, and the way that the Mentimeter is structured is that we're asking you first to look at all 3 of these options and decide if each option is acceptable or unacceptable. It's a scale. It'll go from unacceptable to acceptable or somewhere in between. And then after that, we'll see where everybody falls out. And then if there's sort of a clear top 2, we'll ask people of those top 2, which one is your preferred option? Does that sound reasonable to everybody? Okay. So use this QR code. Do you have the Mentimeter link in the chat or post back out there? Then the QR code.
Yeah, thank you.
We are seeing the very last question in the Mentimeter. So if someone is presenting, whoever's presenting, I don't know.
What do you see now?
Yeah, there we go.
Yes.
Yeah, 20 responses so far.
So we have 20 people online and
21 are logged in. There's now the responses are coming in.
Should I do one or should I let just one per organization?
for this, if this is a non-binding vote, it's a temperature check. That's why I've got it framed this way. So the idea is the majority of the people in the room, clearly Mills County has the majority of people. All the right.
Like, don't.
Now your answer's gonna be. See? Yeah, when we get to a place where we're actually, getting to like a higher level of decision towards action, we will invoke the actual voting protocol, which says,
I have a question while people vote, since I wasn't here in October. Was the delaying until 2032, I think is was there any discussion if we keep failing the issue, if that pushes us to then do action sooner because of the requirement, if we fail the 2 years in a row, things like that, because of what the procedures that we have in place?
Yeah, I
See what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. I think we talked about that a little bit, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit more
Okay.
because that's a little bit what was hard when we were coming up with like the order of how to ask these questions, because sort of with which option you choose might influence which timeline you choose. But I think there's more. I think it might be easier for us to figure like how fast.
Okay.
Then, so yes, we talked about those things a little bit, and I think there's probably more conversation to have if that seems to be where the group is.
Well, and I guess just to clarify, so on your question or survey, you're talking about with regard to changing the nutrient. So the numbers.
Show the results.
No, I'm talking about just proposing a path forward. We have to do something. We have to propose something because in the 2022 RA, we were out of compliance in the old Tampa Bay segment. So we have to propose something that demonstrates adherence to this current fiscal can't stay back on track. What we proposed could be that this was an anomalous period, that we're going to continue on as usual, and the department could say, yes, that's acceptable, or no, that's not. We could propose an alternative compliance test. Like these are the options we're going to talk about. But we haven't decided what we're going to propose. But whatever we propose, the question now is: do we hustle and get it done before the end of 2026? Do we wrap it into the next RA update, or do we wait for basically like a whole other RA cycle before we propose something to the department? But right now, you guys haven't told us what everyone's willing to propose.
And this is to submit a proposal, not to have it.
Correct.
So right now we have 16 of 26 responded to the survey. Leave it open for another 30 seconds and then we'll do a short list vote after that.
Do you want to share your screen, Ed?
Yeah, I can.
No, it's online, says they're gonna defer to Stacy's in-person response, so probably you.
All right, if you have not voted, forever hold your peace. I'm going to show the results. So it looks like the top two I'm not sharing it.
You're sharing, but you're sharing a different part of your screen.
Not bad. Yeah, see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, so it looks like the top two responses are to either make a recommendation in the 2027 RA update or defer to the 2032 update. So we're going to do another round of voting. Give me just a second. I'll give you those two options again.
So the purpose of this question is you get one choice, and of the top two, you're going to be selecting which one is your preferred option.
So couldn't you do both though? I mean, just because we do it in 2027 doesn't mean we can't do it again. 2032, right?
Yeah, I think we have options and space to talk about other things right now, but what I am trying to do is, from my perspective as a facilitator, these meetings have felt a lot like Groundhog's Day, where we've continued to sort of bring up the same options. I mean this kindly with, so I'm really trying to be structured about what we discuss. And if we want to talk about a hybrid or an alternative, I promise there will be space to listen to that as a path forward.
So it should be reopened with just those two choices now. So if you go to menti.com and use the code 81730406. I think we had 16 in the last vote, so we're at 14 right now. There's 17 votes now.
No, it's going off the rail.
Did everybody get? You get it?
Yeah. So where's this owl camera? This is the most random. Oh, but the giant owl. Never mind.
Let me reshare. All right. Of the 17 that responded, it looks like the preference would be to have some sort of recommendation for Old Tampa Bay in the current RA cycle and formulate that by the 2027 RA update.
This doesn't commit us to anything, but this gives you an idea of where the majority of the group, at least present today, is at. Does anybody have heartburn about this? Is it helpful to sort of know where you stand with respect to everybody else? Any feedback, thoughts, comments from the folks online?
You repeat the majority one. It's hard to read on the screen.
This would be the middle tier option, which is not to do something immediately, not to wait until 2032, but to make sure we have a clear path forward that's incorporated in the 2027 RA update.
Is there anyone online that wants to comment on that outcome? Hearing none. You can take back over. Yep, let's see it.
Okay. So now the goal is to get into the things where there's room for reasonable people to disagree. So my goal here is, again, to articulate the options that we've continued to sort of hear over and over again at all of these meetings, and just sort of get a sense of who's sort of leaning in what direction. So my goal here is to sort of give you a summary of the option, where it came from, And then what kinds of things as staff we think that the working group participants might want to consider as they sort of decide whether or not it's an option that is acceptable to them, and then later whether or not it's their preferred option. Okay. So the first option is to report on nitrogen load reduction projects as we do in the reasonable assurance plan, and have that be sort of the evidence that there is a reasonable that there is reasonable evidence that we will continue to attain water quality standards in the Old Tampa Bay segment. This was an alternative that was proposed at the last Old Tampa Bay Working Group meeting back in October. So considerations that the group might want to think about, continuing to report on projects that are being implemented to reduce nitrogen loads is something that is consistent with the existing RA compliance assessment process and the decision framework. So this is something that we always report on and would continue to do. And that is sort of aligned with everything that we've all committed to as a group for that reasonable assurance determination process. This approach does deviate from the commitments that were made in the 2022 Reasonable Assurance Plan update and in the Declaration of Cooperation. But that doesn't mean that it's not a path forward, but it is something that you would have to explain why it's different from what was previously proposed. Given what we know from the Task 3 report for the Old Tampa Bay Assimilative Capacity Assessment Project, the known projects that you all have planned in the pipeline are unlikely to just demonstrate significant load reductions. And so you all should be aware of that if this is your plan for demonstrating reasonable assurance to the department that Old Tampa Bay will meet water quality standards. Also, this is something that may jeopardize the reasonable assurance determination for Tampa Bay as a whole. And so we need to confirm that although that path may be acceptable to the Old Tampa Bay Working Group, that risk may not be acceptable to your counterparts in the rest of the consortium. So we would need to confirm that this option is one that is acceptable to them as well. And then, of course, we would have to follow this up with a decision memo requesting clarification and confirmation from the Department of Environmental Protection that this would be sufficient, a sufficient way forward to demonstrate reasonable assurance that Old Tampa Bay will attain water quality standards into the future. So those are the things that we think that you all should consider for this option. Comments or questions about this option? Okay, option 2 that we're asking you to think about is to go forward with an alternative compliance framework. This is the staff recommendation that was proposed at the October Old Tampa Bay Working Group. So that's where this option has come from. And so we think that you ought to consider a few different things. First is that this alternative recommendation was proposed in response to some of the initial feedback that we received from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in their response to the decision memo that was sent earlier this year. So this alternative compliance framework would apply only to Old Tampa Bay and only to total nitrogen. That's the only way that it would, that's the only space and criterion that it would apply to. It would reset total nitrogen load reduction goals for Old Tampa Bay and really focus us on the needed load reductions that the Old Tampa Bay Assimilative Capacity Assessment has suggested are appropriate for that bay segment. This is something that, as it's proposed, may not be enforceable because we're not proposing to try and change the numeric nutrient criteria. When the Florida Department of Environmental Protection sort of presented to the full consortium their response to our initial decision memo, they signaled that they would be open to an alternative adaptive compliance assessment framework that is sort of in concert with the existing protocols and assessment that we do. So this would sort of be an added layer of reporting related to the absolute nitrogen load, but it wouldn't necessarily have a numeric nutrient criteria change, and it may not be enforceable because of that. This is an option that would require additional effort from the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium because we would need to provide further clarification on what that process looks like. We have presented to you all in meetings, what we think that process might look like. But the request from the department back to us in their response was they would need to sort of see a memo where that process is really laid out. And so this would be work we would need to do to respond to the department to give them something to react to. And then, of course, in that same decision memo where we're describing this alternative adaptive compliance assessment process that's based on absolute loading, we would need to also make sure that that is in fact acceptable to the Department of Environmental Protection. So there's another sort of iterative process that goes there. So these are the things we think you need to consider about this option. Questions, comments?
Well, at what point do you want to like really discuss this? I don't want to like jump on your.
I would like to save like big discussion for later. I just kind of want to make sure everybody said it has like level playing field. We're gonna go through these options and then we're gonna get to discussion. We got one meeting to sort of 1 hour to temperature check and 1 hour to discuss. That's sort of how I've played it out in my mind.
Just to make sure that I understand it, is this the one that changes it from hydrologic reporting to the absolute
Yes.
loading?
Yes, but we're not proposing, like we have since moved on from the suggestion that we change the numeric nutrient criteria. So we would continue to report on a hydrologically adjusted nitrogen load, but then we would also report on the absolute nitrogen load for the Old Tampa Bay segment only. So this is sort of like the softer approach that it seemed like the department was open to. It seemed like there was more support for in the room. However, there are some of these concerns that have also been expressed that it might not be enforceable. They might force us to change the numeric nutrient criteria anyways, and then people start getting concerned, I think, right?
Okay.
So, yeah. And then the last option that we've heard and we've sort of been kicking around is to go back to the drawing board and do another assimilative capacity assessment, basically reevaluating the TMDL for the Old Tampa Bay segment. This was an alternative that was proposed to us by a consortium participant after the Old Tampa Bay Working Group meeting in October. And I think we also talked about it a little bit at that meeting, and we've certainly talked about it as an option going forward, and it hasn't been clear. We know some people are interested in it. We don't know how everybody feels about it. So that's part of the temperature check today. Some considerations. You all have already provided funding to support the assimilative capacity assessment project that was completed earlier this year. Pursuing this option would mean additional cost all over again. So you all would have to contribute funding to support that. And we wouldn't be able to provide the same level of support with estuary program resources to do that. So it would be an additional cost to you all as consortium members. And it would obviously take different additional time, which would delay actions. We think that this approach could be beneficial insofar as that reconsiders changes to the ecology that may have occurred since the 1990s. So it could give you a better scientific understanding about this bay segment and how it's functioning. We don't have very much evidence to suggest that a different outcome, a super different outcome would be likely. You know, we've sort of gone through developing a variety of different modeling tools through whether it's the WASP model or the Old Tampa Bay Integrated Ecosystem Model. Variety of these tools, based on all of the information that we have, it suggests that the right number for Old Tampa Bay is somewhere between 314 to 562. Right now we're at 486. So the question of whether or not you would trust the science that comes out of that sort of study and that it's worth the additional effort to probably get you a number that's not super different from the one we have is something that you should consider. If we do go down this path and the number is different from 486, that would likely require a reallocation process. If we get to a better number for the total nitrogen load to Old Tampa Bay, that may help it continue to make sense to continue on with a hydrologic normalization. But that's a may, because we know that relationship is confounded in this bay segment. So something to consider. And then again, this is another option that would, because it would require time and additional effort, we would need to propose this path forward and confirm whether or not that's acceptable to the Department of Environmental Protection. So another decision memo. So you'll notice None of these are gonna be like clear cut, we're done decisions. We need clarification from the department. It's gonna be an incremental stepwise process for any of the options that there may be consensus around. Okay, so those are the options, there's the level playing field of what we think folks need to know. If you don't have any questions or additions to that, let's pop back over to the Menti and see here, you're rating each of these options. Which one is any unacceptable or acceptable? What is its acceptability to you on that scale?
And again, we will be further discussing.
Again, we will be further discussing for sure.
Will the slide change? Would you have to redo the?
Yeah, you might have to refresh your browser.
I didn't know if we would start over.
Is it showing that question, Blake?
Showing on mine. Maybe try to refresh from
Some responses coming in now. Wait for at least 16 to 17 votes before I take it out of presentation. Were you able to get back on, Stacy? Were you able to get back on? Got 14 responses now. We're stuck at 14, so I'm assuming.
Are there folks that are not voting because they are deferring to others that voted the first time around, or what's the reason people aren't voting? Can you share that? That would help us.
All right, we're at 15 votes. Give it 30 more seconds, and then we'll show the results. Oh, there's 16. All right, looks like the top two options would be to report on projects as we traditionally do through the 2027 RA update, and or the second option to explore the alternative adaptive compliance assessment framework. So give me just a second and we'll do a short list based on those two.
So again, a reminder, this next question is saying of those top two options, pick one to prefer.
So again, I'm sorry, I don't know why that's giving me questions. But so just because we're voting on preference doesn't exclude the ability to do the others, correct?
At this point, we haven't decided anything. Okay. Yeah. We're just trying to, what's happened in my perspective as a facilitator is when we have these as conversations in the room, there have been a few voices that we have heard at each and every meeting. And then there are voices that have sort of sidebarred their feedback. So what the room has heard is not necessarily consistent with all of the feelings there. And so we're trying to show everybody where everybody's at. So like my perspective of having one-on-ones or having most of their meeting or call me, do not have the benefit to move somebody. So at this point, we're trying to everybody.
I think it does that
have
when
the
it
same.
does it on respawn.
You gotta do that anyways.
What was that?
Sorry, was there a comment online?
The QR code.
Yeah. So we're at about 10 response. We're going to look at 15 to 16 responses before we close it. Back at 14 again. There's 15. Give it 30 more seconds and then we'll close it. You're right. I'm going to close it. So,
According to the consensus discussion that we talked about at the beginning, demonstrating reasonable assurance by continuing to report on future planned projects for the Old Tampa Bay segment is the option that has the majority of people's preferred option.
take back over.
Okay, Stacy, now we're gonna get into the discussion part. So I think the first question is, does it seem like there's consensus? I would say my read from what we have sort of seen in the results so far is it does seem like there's clear consensus that we don't need to try and hustle to do an RA agenda in 2026. We give ourselves a little bit of breathing room to sort of continue to work through this process and incorporate our recommendations in the 2027 RA update. So that I think that there was consensus around. I think there was this idea of waiting until 2032 to do anything did not seem like there was consensus for. So I think this is a question that we don't need to continue to sort of rehash in the meetings. I think the path will be we're working towards incorporating it in the 2027 RA update. That acceptable to everybody, that reflect your understanding. Whatever path we choose.
So I think my main question is, what is it? Like, what are we?
Correct. And that is where we will be spending most of the time talking about. But it's important for me to know, as a person who's going to try and convey what is decided and what evidence needs to be assembled. What am I working towards here? That's helpful for me to know. I know it's a little bit backwards, but it is helpful. If we can sort of know that that's where we're going. We all agree on it. So I think there's less consensus around the idea of what the path forward is, but the starting point that I would say based on the ground rules that we laid out and the voting protocol that's there is that it seems like the majority of folks are moving us towards making a recommendation towards the consortium that we ought to just continue to report on planned projects, and that is the primary way that we're going to be demonstrating reasonable assurance that Old Tampa Bay will attain water quality standards. So that's what I saw from the results. I wonder what the room thinks about that online and in person.
So if that's what we're gonna do, I feel like people need to step up their projects. As you stated in one of the slides, most of the projects that they have there are not going to improve enough in Old Tampa Bay to justify being like, this is all we're doing.
Yeah.
So I mean, with like speaking for my community, without something requiring us to step up, they're going to be like, oh, we're just going to report the same thing we do every year and do what we do. And so as far as improvements to Old Tampa Bay, the same option number one of moving forward as we always have is not going to work. I was obviously one of the second.
I agree. I think I don't think it provides reasonable assurance, and it leaves us open for intervention by EPA and by third parties that and it opens the way to continue to degrade if what we're doing is not working.
So I think we know there's gonna have to be some big projects coming with the discharges from the water treatment plants. We know there's some big stuff on the horizon, so I think so reporting on what's to come will at least make that clear.
I mean, are those being committed to, or is that something that we will be able to include in the RA?
Those projects absolutely can be included in the RA. Well, the sort of the challenge is what we've developed now is science that sort of says that those projects, if implemented fully,
so that
would
already include those projects.
Yes, the task force report for the Old Tampa Bay Low Capacity Project showed that those, eliminating the surface water discharges, or in most cases, it's actually reducing the surface water discharges, will get you a significant way to the nitrogen load reduction that we would expect to see reductions in chlorophyll A, but it wouldn't get you all of the way to doing that. So I think we're sort of in this place of, to Sarah's point, if you don't have a target of what you're moving towards, it's hard to know. And if you don't change the compliance assessment process, there's no hook beyond the regulations that are already in place for Senate Bill 64 to do those kinds of things. But I think to Stacy's point, I think she's saying it's an adaptive management approach of, we know these projects are coming, let's see how this affects the Bay segment and figure out if additional things are actually required, since the compliance assessment framework that we have now doesn't actually require a higher level of load reduction. But that's the track that we've been in, why we're trying to resolve all of this.
And I think from Pinellas County environmental management standpoint, we just don't know that the target proposed, the absolute load, is the right target. So I'll use your words, we are in support of additional research. So, I mean, we would like to consider funding more research. I feel like there's a lot of questions that are still out there. And also, I went back and read some of the subject matter expert review. Somebody mentioned like the way that we're looking at light attenuation using set keys is really not the best necessarily, especially in this really shallow bay segment. But light core sucked, but there could possibly be new technologies. I mean, we're out doing monitoring. We'd be happy to partner to like maybe look at some new instrumentation, get some fill in data gaps if there's data gaps that still exist. So we just don't trust the target, and so we don't want to set ourselves up for some sort of regulatory non-compliance if we're aiming for a target that may not be the right target and we're not going to be able to achieve it So if we can get more science.
So as
kinda,
it
yeah.
stands right now, not proposing a new target. So like we're talking about adding an extra target of how much load reduction each entity might be contributed to. We're not talking about changing the chlorophyll threshold. We're not talking about changing the hydrologically normalized nitrogen.
So your middle ground though was to look at it in a different way. It won't be a
It's to add, it's to add on an additional layer. The question about whether or not that's enforceable or will actually result in any kind of action is something that has been raised by some of the partners. From how I see it, it seems like the question of enforceability is one that is advantageous from your perspective because it wouldn't, depending on how the department answers, just adding this additional reporting layer, but giving you sort of a strategic direction of how much nitrogen load you need reduction you need to be shooting for, would kind of, it's trying to address your concern about being not in compliance, getting into a forced situation, also trying to address the kind of interest that Sarah is expressing, which is she needs something to shoot for in order to get people to invest in load reduction projects. And I think it's, also maybe it's something that's a little bit beyond what we currently do, which is currently prescribed in the decision framework and the RA process, right? So it kind of addresses what Ilya is talking about, which is, hey, if we just propose doing the same thing, that might open the whole thing up to bigger problems, and that's a risky kind of solution. So
There is
go ahead.
there's one comment in the chat from Kevin O'Donnell, DP. Did you want to unmute yourself and sort of clarify, Kevin, what you're agreeing to?
Yeah, totally. And I don't totally know my role here, and I want to be like interjecting and leading you guys in a certain path. But I guess my mumbling statement that I had earlier when we were talking about the future projects and providing those, my statement was you have to do that anyways, don't you? I mean, that's part of what I guess we should be looking at and saying, what is the reasonable assurance? If Old Tampa Bay is not meeting, then we identified there's a problem. But what more is going to be done? You guys had talked about Lake Tarpon and flows and hydrology for that, or other projects in the area. And so I think that's my point is that's kind of the requirement for what is reasonable assurance that the projects are going to be implemented to attain standards. So the two options of the questions were like, well, the first one was a no-brainer. You have to do that. So the second part of I think if I'm correct, like a similar capacity review is the other part. That's different. That's my statement. And again, not trying to lead you guys because it is your decision making. So.
No, I think that's helpful context, Kevin, and I think you don't have to answer this now. I think most folks online and in the room understand the reporting on these load reduction projects is part of the requirements already. What they need to decide is whether or not that is going to be sufficient moving forward for the Old Tampa Bay segment, and whether or not they're in a place to propose that as a question back to the department. Like I said, I wouldn't expect you to answer that right now, but I think that's sort of the question of the room is like, hey, can we propose just continuing on?
Well, but with the understanding, can we propose that we hope to do more research? I know it all depends on funding, but I'm saying after talking to my higher ups at the county, we would be supportive of putting money toward answering some of these additional questions that have come up. We just don't feel like the information that was presented as part of this report, I don't think really got there. I think there's still a lot of questions.
I would suggest if you go back and look, so the answer is yes, and we're supportive and we're happy to partner on that kind of work. I would offer that if you look at the 2022 reasonable assurance plan and all of the interim annual assessments, you'll see that the majority of the projects that we have been pursuing are research projects. Exactly.
Right. So I'm saying you can throw not just we won't just be reporting on the projects that are in the works. We're also saying, and we are funding research to continue to understand this problem, because I feel like we're just not confident in.
Yes, you are not convinced that additional load reductions are necessary in Old Tampa Bay, have I?
I mean, obviously, lower nutrients, yay, good, but that's not the only thing. It's a complicated system. So there's a lot of other.
I don't think anyone's arguing that that's the only thing, but it is the salient thing for the discussion of the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium. So it's a question of, do we do other things plus load reductions, or are the other things sufficient to demonstrate that Old Tampa Bay is going to get back on track and meet its water quality standards? I think that's sort of the place. That's sort of like how your comments sort of translate in my mind, and if that's not accurate.
Well, I'm trying to think. So chlorophyll is what's impaired right now, and it's on the 303D list. So we do have a regulatory requirement to act, right? The nitrogen is taxing. So, there's what's the source of the inflated chlorophyll, right? We've said pyridinium, maybe, and so I think it's not necessarily, again, reducing nitrogen will be good, but that may not be all, that's not maybe the full story, right? It's the interactions between these other things, which is why we're looking at oyster rehabbing, restoration, or, so I don't know where I'm going with this, but basically I think, continuing to research the problem is also part of the reasonable assurance plan, that we're not just saying, okay, let's just go back to this number that, I think Tony Janicki said last time, it was never meant to be a TMDL, that number, but it got adopted because there was pressure from EPA, DEP, thing. So, I mean, I'm still probably in the minority, including probably not in agreement with DEP that, I don't necessarily think it's bad to relook at that number, the TMDL number itself, but maybe not right now, because I still think you just have too many questions about what is causing the chlorophyll in this area.
Yeah, I think we agree on many of the things that you're suggesting, and I would like to be clear that we're going to continue to investigate and pursue these alternative complementary actions. We are in a place where we are already adaptively managing all of Tampa Bay, Old Tampa Bay included, and so we have a framework that's laid out. It basically calls for that step to happen. So like we could find ourselves like back in this loop again, maybe not during this RA cycle, but in the future, if we don't do anything differently, if we just continue to report on the projects that we're doing to reduce nitrogen load, and we're thinking about chlorophyll in relationship to a hydrologically normalized nitrogen load, we could get to this place again where we are not attaining chlorophyll standards, but we do meet a hydrologically normalized nitrogen load, and we'll have to get to this place of going back and reassessing the assimilative capacity all over again. That is a possible outcome following this framework that is laid out for reasonable assurance. And so we're not proposing to throw away this process. So I still think that sort of adaptive, we might come back to that later. That may happen. The question is, do you want to sort of commit to that path now, or do you want to commit to one of these other options that doesn't get you looking at whether or not the TMDL itself needs to be revised?
This is Heather Maggio. I'm online, City of Tampa.
Go ahead, Heather.
I did see, all the options, and I'm seeing that the option one seems to be the option that most of us are selecting. I did want to bring up something that from the last meeting that was clarified, I believe, after the online ended, which was just the fact that we have our general habitat defined criteria in the Tampa Bay Estuary Programs, the Habitat Master Plan. So when you look under the habitat types and the overviews and how they're classified, stormwater ponds are not included in this category. So, my suggestion is to also have a category of habitat creation and enhancement because we're not restoring a habitat, we're actually recreating. And a perfect example would be McDill 48, which was not included in the habitat restoration selection because it was not eligible and according to the master plan. So maybe looking over those definitions and including not just restoration, but creation and enhancement, and maybe seagrass enhancement projects may be part of that because right now those are only counted if they're actually restoration, not really a creation. So I
So
don't think
Heather,
habitat restoration has really been explored. And I also, I know for me personally, I did not include McDill 48 in that list for inclusion for the RA assurance for this reporting on projects. So the other stormwater ponds that are also in our jurisdiction, I'd like to see an annual estimation on the reductions because I don't see stormwater ponds receiving credit on an annual basis for nitrogen load reductions. I see estimates, but I don't see exact. And then the other point I wanted to bring up was Marcus's presentation on the SSOs earlier on this year. It was a great accountability of what we are all doing as an SSO collective as a whole. And I know it was under the three storm significant event, and that's why it was more evaluated for that. But we had no storms this year. So I would like to see what the SSO was for 2025 under the premise that we didn't have any hurricanes. Are we just having that issue during significant events, or is this a maintenance issue that has to be addressed? So there could be other avenues of targeting this reporting on projects that we're just not really digging deeper.
so Heather, for the benefit of everyone, I think you might be confusing a couple of the different reporting tools that we use. We do ask partners to report on habitat restoration projects. That's through a separate reporting tool than the action plan database, whereas projects like McDill 48, which have a habitat restoration component but are primarily stormwater management projects, those are completely appropriate for you all to put into the action plan database. Those are in fact the exact projects that we need you to submit to the action plan database so that we're able to demonstrate that you're doing load reduction projects to offset the growth and loading in the TIF community. So I do understand that we asked you guys for, not an insignificant amount of information. But I hope that you are all inputting those kinds of projects, like when you build a new stormwater treatment facility, like McDill 48, that is something that you are inputting into the action plan database.
Exactly. And that's exactly my point. And you clarified that for me after the last October meeting, because and according to the manual, and when you look at the manual and you go through the manual and you look at the general habitat types, it specifically talks about it in the overview, although it even says, although in the past we have included stormwater conveyances, stormwater ponds, encatchments, rain gardens, etc. They do not closely enough replicate natural systems, reference structures, and processes. Therefore, they do not fit in the intent of reporting. And this,
right. So
and therefore ineligible.
Heather, we don't want you to report that information to the habitat restoration database. We want you to report that information to the action plan database. That's, I think, I'm not
okay,
sure.
so that's where I think that's where I was clarified on the last meeting. And so now I will continue to do that. And I will also take any of the other ponds. I think any of these ponds that we have created some type of habitat in addition to the stormwater flooding issues, I don't believe that we're getting total credit. That's just what I'm saying. It's an example in Tampa of where we did a huge project last year and yet we didn't put it into that because it was based on the definitions defined. So maybe the clarification could be better. And then my second point was Marcus's presentation on the SSOs. I'd like to see what our discharges are with no hurricanes versus last year with 3 hurricanes. I want to see if those significant events can also offset our
I hear you, Heather. I'm gonna ask that we let other folks have an opportunity to speak, and I will just kind of share with the room that, when we're at the full consortium meeting in December, the idea is to present the loading information from 2022, 2023, and 2024. It's still draft in this form, but you can get an idea of how we're performing. We'll be able to look at it on an absolute basis as well as on a normalized basis. And if you'd like us to provide some complementary information about SSOs, we might be able to make that happen, if not at that meeting, at a subsequent one. So I think we can accommodate that. I would like to sort of keep this conversation laser focused on sort of where there's consensus, what we need to talk about, and if we're ready to sort of propose path forward. Because we have been talking about this for a long time. So
Are there other comments online? If you would like to speak, it would be great if you raised your hand, or you could just unmute yourself.
Maya, can you go back to the place that you were, the slide you were just at, the RA stuff? So how much commitment do we need to put into the 2027 RA? Can we just say, hey, we're going to look at these absolute values as well and just provide you this information, and we'll be analyzing this with it? Or do we have to say something we're formally using this? Could we just be like, hey, we just want to see how things work out, and then we'll decide later if this is a valid way of looking at things?
Yeah, I think what you're proposing right now is what we are proposing for option 2 at this point. And the question is whether or not this sort of just sort of additional assessment way of looking at things is acceptable to the department if it doesn't have any sort of actual regulatory change in terms of changing the numeric nutrient criteria to an absolute load. So that's the option that we're presenting right now for option 2, which there were.
Go ahead, finish.
So with that, then we're not saying that this is the absolute right answer. We're saying this is something we're going to look at, and through the next few years, we might decide that this isn't the answer and it could be changed. But
point is to, I don't want anybody labeling any false preachers. We always provide those absolute loads in each of these reports. They're always there. So they have been and will continue to be. It's not like we're providing DEP something they haven't seen. So just so you know, it wouldn't be.
Or you all.
So what's the difference between that and option 2?
I think what we would do is we would present the information a little bit more transparently. So, and this is sort of, I think, if there's that's generally acceptable to the group, and it seemed like while it wasn't the preferred option of the majority, it was acceptable to many of you. What we could do is sort of we need to spend time to sort of flesh out what that would look like. And I envision it right now as sort of laying out a process that sort of that clarifies some of the information that Ed has been presenting, and also working with you about how we would report to you all as individual entities, sort of how you're performing relative to those goals, which is some of the tools that Marcus has been putting together, and we started to share with y'all already. So I think what we're seeing is maybe you guys aren't seeing the information that is in the RA assessments as it relates to your specific entity, because what we're doing is reporting on it on a base segment basis, and so it's not as relevant and actionable to you all as individual entities. We've been really cautious, right, about presenting that information in a way that makes one entity, So that's why we've presented it in the way that we have, this way the process is laid out, and we're sort of respecting that this is an all for one for all thing. But I think what we're hearing from you is you might benefit from some sort of more tailored approach. And so this is what we would negotiate looking forward, is how would we help you sort of figure out how much work you need to do for an equitable contribution to reducing the load in that base segment, where all of the evidence that we have from the 1990s to today suggests that this base segment would benefit from additional load reductions. It's not the only thing, but all of the evidence we have is pointed in one direction. It's not super mysterious in my read of the evidence and the reports that are out there. Comments online?
I have a question, and I may be opening up the door. Because there's a lot of talk about doing more research. What did we get from the money that we just spent? I mean, can you refresh us of what was the outcome of the study that we just spend money on and time on? And
Yeah, so
I thought it was a similar capacity study, which is what we're talking about doing again, so.
right, I think the difference in terms of what's being requested for doing it again is sort of making a decision that wasn't made during this assimilative capacity assessment to go do a full-blown TMDL assessment to look at, if that 486 number is right. And what we decided in this assimilative capacity assessment was sort of this case that we're sort of, that we've been sharing with you all along the way is 486 may or may not be the right number, but it's been the number we started with. It has some benefits. We think that it is at least falling in line with something that is reasonable. We're not currently attaining it. So on the path towards attaining it, we might find out about a little bit of whether or not it is the right number, isn't the right number, whether or not it actually makes more sense to go through and do a full-blown assimilative capacity assessment to evaluate that number. Essentially, the findings of this assimilative capacity assessment that we have completed with support from you all is that there is a disconnect between the hydrologically normalized load. It does not really tell you very much in terms of what kinds of chlorophyll conditions that you might expect in that base segment. However, if you look at the absolute load, it does better explain the kinds of chlorophyll conditions that you would see. So it's going to explain about 60 to 70% of the variation in chlorophyll conditions. That is a stronger level of confidence than the data that we based the original reasonable assurance stuff on from work in the 1990s and the early 2000s. So it's sort of building on that body of evidence. It's corroborating that the way that we've been managing this base segment mostly works, but there's an additional dynamic that's related to hydrology that is confounding that. And so you would have better explanatory power if you looked at the absolute loading conditions. Not perfect. I'm not going to give you 90, 95 or 100% confidence that if you get the load right, that the chlorophyll A concentrations are there. So I will never try and give you that level of certainty or assurance. There's always things that we can learn more about, but that absolute load is going to give you a better explanatory power over the chlorophyll conditions. So that's why it's certainly the study made compromises along the way, but essentially that's what it found. And then when we looked at, okay, so if you take that and you look at the projects that you all have known and planned, currently you do not have enough projects known and planned to make the absolute load reductions that would produce the chlorophyll outcomes that are necessary for attaining the water quality standard in Old Tampa Bay. We've got a fairly significant delta to make up there. That fairly significant delta, we did not want to be viewed as insurmountable to this group. So we looked at how both projects that we know are coming on a longer time horizon, like eliminating surface water discharge, will contribute to making that delta smaller. It did not get rid of it. It shrinks it maybe in half if we're lucky. And then how some of these complementary projects, probably most powerfully, if we were able to do something to reduce the amount of flow from Lake Tarpon, that's not a known or planned project at this point. It's an option, but it does not count as known or planned. That could do a lot in terms of that load reduction. And then anything else, you have to look at what the remaining options are. That's stormwater sources and atmospheric sources primarily. So it's not probably in this base segment, based on the evidence that we have, one source that's going to sort of get you all the way there. You've got quite a bit of ways to go. And so we're trying to assemble something that is acceptable, but that aligns the incentives towards those load reductions, because that's what the best available science that you guys may not support that or believe in it, or have been sufficiently convinced by the evidence that's out there. That's my read on sort of where the part of the consortium is at this point. But we're trying to align a process that reflects what the evidence suggests and what the interests are. And the interest, again, well, marginal condition of Old Tampa Bay is not acceptable, and we need something to help us generate the political will, sort of get us over the hump on a trajectory towards a non-marginal condition in Old Tampa Bay. So none of this is easy. This is what we're trying to put
Thanks for the
together.
recap. That helped.
Well,
Because I mean, it even took me to, go back to the beginning when we were looking into the report that, the study that was done. I think there were a lot of concerns about relooking at the TMDL to begin with.
Yes.
And that's why we didn't do it this, so are we saying now that the next project is going to do it?
Interest that we're trying to like propose recommendations and options for is this idea that folks are stressed, and rightfully so, about not just non-compliance but also about reallocation. And so if the number's not right, we're headed towards reallocation, and folks have told us that
And the
that's
number
not,
could go down.
that's not exciting.
Yeah. Just have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I was just gonna reiterate what you said. There's never gonna be 100% certainty that if we do this, we'll achieve this. And I think that's just part of managing a large ecosystem where there's so many pieces that we can't control for it all. And the best we can do is provide this weight of evidence that looking at multiple fronts suggests that if we go in this direction, we will get improvements. And I think there's been some hangups on like the level of certainty of whether or not there will be a change. Also, is the number correct? But also, the point was made earlier that if we did do the internal capacity study again, we're probably going to get a similar number. And even then, that number is not going to give you 100% certainty that if you achieve it, we'll get the desired outcome. So it's I look at this in a pragmatic way, as I think a lot of you do, where we need to put lines in the sand somewhere. There's always going to be a debate over whether or not it's the right number, and in all likelihood, moving towards that will give us a better chance.
We're never gonna stop the research. That's always like a complimentary service that the estuary program has provided. And I don't think anyone, at least I can speak for myself, I would never argue that we know everything that was driving seagrass loss in that bay segment. I don't think we do. But I do think that based on all of the possibilities of things, the thing that we know is most likely to help seagrasses recover is still nitrogen load reductions. It's not going to be everything. There's more questions to ask and answer, but I do feel like we know nitrogen load reductions have a benefit to the system. We've seen it. So that's more of a.
So we're not able to add like the tarpaulin, the Lake Tarpaulin project because it's not on the works. It's not funded. It's not.
It's coming. If Tampa Bay.
Okay, and that's what I'm thinking. If it's coming, then why we're not including it?
Once Tampa Bay Water commits to that as the option that they're doing right now, it's just a feasibility assessment. They haven't selected it, to my knowledge, or you have different info than I do. No, not really, but so I mean, but like, please tell me, because I'm happy to be wrong about this. But one, they have to select what their future drinking water source options are. And so it's going to go through sort of, again, the same process what we're doing right now. They start off with the wide part of the funnel. They've got a lot of options. And then they start to narrow it down to which ones they're actually going to put through all the way to permitting and implementation. So right now they're looking at new well fields out in Pasco County. They're looking at additional surface water withdrawals from some of the rivers in Hillsborough County. And this is one of the options, but they haven't selected this option. And so I would say we can't put it down until we know that this is a project that they will be first.
But I mean, pushing this to the 2027 probably helps us with that timeline.
It may, yeah.
Of having more information about that. Sure. And then the oysters restoration, it was because there really isn't a commitment from the consortium on who's going to take care of it.
Yeah, I think with the estuary program, we do the oyster recommendations, ones that are not sort of within the responsibility and purview of the nitrogen management consortium. I think of interest in whether or not those projects are pursued, but we view that as something that our Habitat Restoration Consortium and our Technical Advisory Committee should adopt, and we should push it through the management conference because that's a goal that they could adopt. It could be helpful to you all in managing Old Tampa Bay. And I think we all have the interest in managing Old Tampa Bay. It's sort of what everyone's like responsible for in terms of contributing. And I would say y'all are responsible for the nitrogen load and they're responsible for some of these other things, right? Because you can't necessarily, like all of the consortium can't obligate projects like that. Some partners could contribute towards that, but it's sort of outside this venue. And I'll offer that like what the Technical Advisory Committee and the Habitat Restoration Consortium are currently looking at. And this is an important kind of interface. Maybe we should have a joint meeting or something like that, because they are looking at natural oyster reef restoration. And if you read the task through report, and I don't blame you if you didn't make it all the way through, but natural oyster reef restoration might ultimately convert long-term into a net source of nitrogen into the system. And so if I was representing your interests as the Nitrogen Management Consortium, I would be talking to those folks about some of these alternative techniques for like aquaculture, how you can be using the oysters to reduce a chlorophyll concentration, but then taking them out of the system before they are. Yeah, and that is a place where your interests and their interests might not align, and so having those conversations might be.
Might be what?
RJ, did you have something you wanted to say? Is there any other comments online? So it sounds like the approach moving forward, we're also going to go through a step of potentially brainstorming and any add-ons to it. But to summarize what we've been hearing, we were going to approach completing the 2027 reasonable assurance update with a listing of projects that will hopefully provide that additional reasonable assurance that Old Tampa Bay's water quality conditions will be met in the future. And I again want to put a lot of that onus on the partners to make sure that they're entering projects into the action plan database so that we're capturing some of the projects we heard, like Heather was explaining from the city of Tampa. We don't want to neglect those things in the action plan database reporting and the reasonable assurance updates. So if you're not entering those projects, that does us a disservice, I think, in demonstrating to the department that there's action to move us toward a better water quality condition. The I think question we'll still have and probably need to resolve with the department is whether or not that is an adequate sense of urgency to get things completed in time to have an effect. We're going to go through the next 5-year RA cycle. Right now we're okay through from 2022 probably through 2025 in terms of chlorophyll A conditions. However, we continue to see seagrass loss in that bay segment, which is why we're trying to maintain chlorophyll A conditions at certain levels. So we're not seeing that response just yet. Again, I think we're going to need to lean on you guys heavily to demonstrate that there's going to be projects implemented not only over the next 5-year period, but probably for the next 5 to 15 years at a sufficient level. And the science I think that we've developed is if we're moving closer to that 486 ton loading condition, that water quality conditions are probably going to be of more of a benefit for seagrass recovery at that point. So as much as you could provide that evidence to us in these reasonable assurance updates, we're going to be leaning on you to do that. I think we're still open to kind of working through how this reporting process is going to take place. And we do have another Mentimeter if we want to ask for other ideas that we haven't been expressed so far, but that's what I'm kind of hearing from the group as it stands right now from this decision-making process that we present back to the full consortium in December.
Ed, I just wanted to make one more comment also. There has been movement in the DEP MS4 program. The intent, from my understanding, is that all the cities and counties will be receiving new MS4 permits in the early of next year, January, February. And the requirements, the additional requirements that are in that new permit, we had an analysis done in our operations yard. We are going to have a startup cost of an additional $6 million for the additional requirements in that MS4, which include non-structural BMPs and ramping up of services that we already have to smaller cycles of maintenance. So instead of a 10-year cycle of inventory maintenance that we're doing on stormwater, water quality, pollution, etc., we're going to a 5-year cycle. So our annual cost we've estimated would be about $5 million in addition to what we already spend on that program. And that also would fall into the TMDL program, because once those new permits are issued, then your sub watersheds are then going to have prioritizations done, and those will be submitted to the TMDL program at DEP for evaluation. So your sub watersheds will also have additional CIPs and non-structurals being worked on, as well as this program, the NMC program. So there's other programs in route, and then there's one final program that they've also ramped up, which is the NOI construction site requirements. Starting in the beginning of next year, there are several additional requirements to ensure that the BMPs are in place and that turbidity is not releasing large amounts of sediments from construction sites. And that workshop was held yesterday, and they're drafting comments through the end of the year. So all of those different programs outside of this program, those requirements are all getting amplified and enhanced. So that will flow into this program, because that's all about nitrogen load reductions as well.
Okay, so I want to be clear about what I've heard so far and what that means in terms of the process and the path forward. What I've heard so far is that there is general consensus to adopt this into the 2027 RA update. And right now, based on the rules that we set out with at the beginning, that a simple majority is reflecting the consensus that what we will be recommending to the full consortium is that we are seeking concurrence from DEP that reporting on the projects that we have planned would be sufficient to demonstrate reasonable assurance going forward. Those were sort of how we set up. I know we've had conversations that some of the folks in the room are expressing that they're not comfortable with that path. Is there feedback from others who, take issue with that as the path forward? Well, it's not, none of this is a decision anyway. So again, from a process stewardship, this is what's the consensus of this group right now? What do we recommend to the full consortium? Full consortium might not find this acceptable, and we might have to come back to this group. And then the question is the close second option acceptable to people to propose back? Or what Ed was sort of moving towards is, are there other options that you guys haven't shared with us yet that you would like us to consider? We do have an open-ended poll question to where we could go through that if you're prepared with other options. Sure. There.
So, if the consensus is option 1, I can support that. I would ask that, maybe with your new public outreach person, we do a little bit more specific outreach to residents and how they can reach out to their elected officials requesting things, requesting certain projects be priorities or things like that. But yeah, I mean, if the consensus is the first one, then I'm okay with that.
I mean, that takes me to, if we are already reporting absolute levels, what's the harm in, people need to take responsibility and be accountable. And, we've heard that you need this data to show to your officials to get money and projects approved. Then what is the problem of so basically what we're talking about in option 2 is to change the way that data is reported. Instead of reporting it in a base, for the whole basin, to report it specifically for entities. That's basically it, right? That's what we're talking about.
We're not even necessarily going into the entity level unless we're in a multi-year situation where we need to dive that deep. But we're just talking about sort of moving up the transparency of what the absolute loading condition is, as well as what the hydrologically normalized.
See, and I don't see a problem with that, especially when that's probably potentially giving you a tool that you can use to get these projects and other projects approved.
Ilya on a paddleboard. And everybody else is on the yacht.
I'm in agreement with Sarah. I mean, I want the option two people, but I can live without the one. That's unique this year. It's one place.
Our load is pretty small, so we'll go with the majority, but I just don't see the harm in option two when it does provide more data and more transparency. And at least it shows third parties and regulatory agencies that we're doing a little bit more than just keep reporting on.
And I think just to add to that, what Maya mentioned, making that information a little bit more transparent in this RA reporting time period will be fairly easy to do. And I think just based on the draft loading information that we've seen, 22 and 23 were pretty low loading years into Old Tampa Bay, and we met chlorofluoride condition. Wasn't necessarily agreement in 2024 where there was a big load because of the hurricanes, but we still met chlorofluoride conditions. But that was because this high chlorophyll A values came at the very tail end of the year, and it didn't count towards the overall annual average. So there is that connection still, and we'll be glad to make that a little bit more transparent and report on that in this RA cycle as additional information that will help hopefully guide us towards projects and identifying projects that move us closer towards a loading condition that produces a chlorophyll A value that we still think is adequate to support seagrasses in that bay segment. So I think that's sort of like building off the options.
I think from our perspective, I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat as Sarah. We again don't have that much of a contributing area to Old Tampa Bay, but eventually I think as a group we're going to have to rip this Band-Aid off. And but we can be hopeful that what we're doing and what we plan on doing will make significant impacts. History hasn't really, supported that. But again, if the consensus is to keep reporting and hope that things get better, there will be a time when we may have to rip that Band-Aid off.
Well, I want to be clear, the time may come faster than you guys want. If that's the consensus right now, this is okay. And we can work this process how you guys want, because we are serving you all. So what you will represent, we can represent this consensus at the moment. What we have to do is present it to the full consortium. The full consortium will weigh in. We will present these considerations to them, just like we have presented to you, and they will vote on whether or not an actual clarifying decision memo is then sent to the department. So that's one stop where a decision memo that sort of goes in this direction that you all are expressing preference for, could happen or not happen. Not a given, right? And then so say it happens, like we're half dependency here, it happens. We send it a memo clarifying whether or not this is acceptable to the department as demonstrating reasonable assurance. Then both EPA and the department will have an opportunity to weigh in on whether or not that is acceptable. And depending on what their response is, we're either going to implement this as we do, or we're going to be back in this room having these conversations about, okay, what's the next best option that you're willing to do? So it's a matter of, I'm hesitant to even commit to some of the things that you're asking for at this point, Sarah, because I don't think we're there yet. So I don't want you to feel like, this is what we want to do, so this is what we're going to do. This is what we want to do, so we're going to go through the process to see if that's a feasible option. If it is feasible, then we will talk about some of these things that make it more acceptable to those of you who are a little bit hesitant as this being path. So everybody's going to be hesitant about one path or the other. That's inevitable. I'm comfortable in that space. We'll do the best to serve everybody in the interest that we've expressed and shared together. That's what we're trying to do. So right now, unless somebody says like, no, this is not the consensus of this group, 2027 RA, report on projects as usual. Is that okay with the full consortium? Is that okay with the regulatory bodies? That's what I've heard from this meeting today. Like I think Ed is suggesting, like Ray has offered, we've already been developing some of these complementary tools. We won't be proposing this to the department based on what you all have suggested today, but we're probably going to keep working with you on thinking about things going forward. Is that clear from a process perspective? Is it reflecting the decisions and the comments and the positions, the things that you all have shared today?
The tools that you just mentioned, is that, would that include, because I think it would be valuable information for the entities to know what their absolute load is. But I don't know if, is that something that you can do outside of the report or? Okay.
I think it's very important, for everyone to go back and just read the last RA update.
Okay.
So you know exactly what's in that RA.
That's the thing, I haven't.
Without trying to get packaging. And
Yes, yeah, but so it is there by
a lot of my time making.
So we got absolute loads by entity, and they're going to be there in the next. So. Okay.
All that stuff.
Okay.
Is.
So
is
we're
linked.
kind of like already doing option
Done
two.
nicely. But yeah, everything is.
Okay.
And when you something confused, you call.
Okay.
Well, and I think the more familiar you are with what's reported in the RA, if you look at it and if you have ideas about how we could share that information in a way that's more helpful to you all, like whether or not it's formally included in the RA itself or it's like part of a supporting resource that we're putting together, there's lots of ways to summarize this information and share it. And that's sort of internally what I've sort of pushed everybody is like, hey, if I was, whatever utility, I wouldn't, this isn't a helpful way. This isn't what I would want to know. I would want to know it this way. So that's useful feedback for us to better serve you all as well. So the next, if everyone thinks that what I've stated reflects what was decided in this group, then we've got 15 minutes left in this meeting. We can start to flesh out what the decision memo looks like with this proposal. That's one option of how to proceed. Or alternatives, like does somebody want to offer to start drafting that and then share it with the group so that you've seen it before we go to the full consortium? How do you guys want to start putting this decision, clarifying what it is, putting pen to paper so that you have something clearly to share with the full consortium? Got 15 minutes now to do it, or we've got time between now and December. So we're looking for help from y'all.
Can I ask one question? It's not related to what you're just asking. So just kind of, I guess, back to the documents that we already have, the information we already know. So I just keep thinking about the circulation issue in Old Tampa Bay. Do we have a updated model on that? Like I've been looking, I mean, I saw something about 90s. I mean, I think something in Lower Tampa Bay. Have I totally missed like where's the circulation? What's the latest and greatest circulation model in Old Tampa Bay?
There's a couple. The old Tampa Bay integrated model was sort of the last uniform attempt that was developed from 2012 to 2015 over the, what was it, 2000 through 2010 time period. We've updated that to a certain extent with more recent information, going through a no actionable science grant, and that was updating that information through what it was 2021, I believe. There's also a USF circulation model of the bay that's used not necessarily for nitrogen management, but just for understanding water levels and general circulation patterns in the bay. So there are other tools out there.
Their website has some good resources.
Trying to look at the same thing.
Yeah, the guy that USF have done what they took all the qualities out to see what they're got. Some estimates of what that would be the residents.
Yeah,
that's something you're looking.
Yeah, that's a little bit different too. That's Steve Luther, Marvin and Steve, Martin Luther and Steve Myers, and then part of the Old Tampa Bay Actionable Science project was doing more realistic kind of modeling instead of like eliminating the causeways, where what size and which locations of causeway modifications would be the most impactful in terms of improving circulation conditions. So there's a variety of tools that are current.
Could somebody just email that out again?
Paper isn't that one Maya's talking about, thing like that.
I think I was not searching the right words, because in circulation,
We'll follow up with an email. that
Okay.
links. Can I send it just to you, or are you requesting that I send it to everybody?
I can't speak for everyone's, but yeah.
I'm fine if you send it just.
I don't think I'll reach it.
All right, sorry, back to your.
Yeah.
I'm working on the statement.
What's that?
I'm working on a statement right now. I'll
Do you
put
want
it.
me to let me share?
Let me,
Not want to do it live?
let me finish it before I share it.
So it's coming up with something in the next 10 minutes?
Something for you guys.
It will help to have something to
Yeah, we don't,
review.
we don't want to be in the position again where we are representing the Old Tampa Bay Working Group consensus recommendation. And then have you all at that meeting not, we don't want to, you need to be there with one voice. And so if we're not putting something together that's reflecting what was decided at this meeting, that's problematic for the whole consortium. You know, they've asked you guys to work together to chart the path forward. Well, while Ed's writing, I'll ask, you know, I think we can reach out like we did last year for individual one-on-ones with those entities that weren't able to make today's meeting. Is that something that you still think is appropriate and would be desired?
I think so. Yeah. I think the consensus is important. And so just letting them know before we meet and with the whole group to know what we decided and if they're.
As you say, so if they're comfortable with what you've decided, that's easy for me to handle, right? If they represent a feeling that is not what that's not their preferred.
If they add for 7 and make it work, then we're totally good with the second one.
Well, and I don't know, I'm like a habitual person, but I don't know if you could like even solicit from everyone like a little written statement. I don't know, because I think just verbally, sometimes maybe I think that you're hearing something and I'm hearing something that you think I'm hearing, and you know, like just I prefer like a written yay, nay explanation myself versus just a verbal question. And it's also easier for me to pass along to Kelly or Melanie or whoever if I have it written and we both agree that what's written down. That makes
it does not make sense to me. I'm not following. What is it that you would like to see in writing?
So if it's something that then we're all supposed to, well, like people who aren't here, we haven't had a chance to hear from them. So if they vote or if you just have a discussion with them, I don't know. I just like to see like what's everybody thinking. Just like give me a little statement.
I think that's what Ed had.
Right.
No, I think what you're asking for is a write-up from each of those individual one-on-one meetings.
One write-up, but just like, I mean, I actually, you know, Kelly and Melanie, I just went, yes, no, on each of your action items, you know, and just like if there was any reasoning, like something you wanted to state as to why you are in support of or against a particular action. All right.
No, I'm trying to.
See, I think this is what my point is. Like, I'm saying something that I'm hoping you're understanding. You're not understanding.
But I'm clear when I'm not I'm clear when I'm not understanding you. So I'm happy to put things to writing, but what I'm not clear on is what you are asking me to put in writing.
So I'm just saying, like, each of the entities that have a stake in Old Tampa Bay, maybe just, you know, Pinellas County, yes, on this action. I mean, I guess we were not on our Mentimeter, so maybe people don't want to be non-anonymous, but I mean.
You want everybody to state their position in writing.
Possibly, I mean, I don't know, maybe that's too much. I mean, I don't have a problem saying this is our.
I mean, the whole reason we structured this meeting as a series of votes is because, you know, like I said, my sense is people were hearing parts, not the whole. And so it was important to hear the whole and where things fall out to that kind of levels the playing field in terms of the information. If it's important who says what, you know, we haven't gone that route because, like I said, I don't view this as like, we're not to like the super formal voting protocol yet, which we can get to that place where we lay it all out. But if others would like, you know, each entity to sort of say how they fell out on each of the questions that we asked, which is your preferred option and which ones are acceptable or not, you know, we can do that. if that's what you're asking for.
Well, partly like on the 8-7 split, you know, it's like, okay, so then you talk to 3 other people or entities who aren't here and it changes the opinion, you know, I'm just asking for some communication on from what you hear from the other people. Sure.
I think we're at a point where just reviewing what us as a group plan to, you know, what's the majority saying that we plan to recommend to the consortium and address any concerns with the language. Regardless of what we, you know, if we want option 1, 2, or 3, I think we're beyond that, pretty much.
Yeah, that's more what I was trying to get at is like it is one possible outcome is that when I talk to additional folks, they might change like Sarah's alluding to the sway from 7 to 8. Like go the other way.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're.
And then I'm in an awkward position of do I have to call do we have to have another meeting to talk about? Is this what you guys need?
Yeah, like I mean, I like option 2 better, but I'm past that, and I'd rather review what we're instead of going.
Yeah, I'm much more interested in like, okay, if this is where the consensus is, let's work it through and keep moving forward. We might still find out that this is not a feasible path forward. I want to be really clear to everybody that might be a possible outcome, but let's work it. Like if this is where the consensus is now, you will need to be told from the department, is my guess, or from the consortium that this is not an acceptable path forward. So that's okay. Then we will work this that way. That's okay with me.
So, I know we had stated this in the beginning, but is it possible, or are you supportive of the entities that aren't here just saying this is the consensus from this meeting
of those present at this meeting.
Of those present at this meeting and informing them of that, so then we do have the working group consensus moving into the nitrogen management consortium instead of asking them what their opinion is, saying this is what was decided.
I mean, just send that language that it's, I mean, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
I think that captures what was decided. Send it to everybody in the group so everybody has their say in, and if they have any concerns with the language. And
Who do we have missing? Oldsmar?
Oldsmar, Safety Harbor, Pinellas Park, Pasco, Tarpon Springs, and McDill. And then various CDDs that don't generally participate.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable approach. Inform them, and I guess in my head, if somebody did have like a real issue with this and felt really strongly about something else, then
they should have been here.
You know, you're thinking it, I'll say it. Participate at the full consortium meeting too.
Exactly.
And, you know, we can hash out, we can do this publicly, we can do this privately, but like, you know, like we can, you know, build the consensus as the working group, or we can have a less unified kind of position and let the chips fall as they do with the consortium. But I don't think it will reflect well on this group if there is not sort of a one voice going into the full consortium. That's my counsel to you all as the person facilitating it, sort of seeing how these conversations have played out over time.
We can also too, in sort of sending this out and, you know, thinking about getting the feedback from the partners that aren't here, but also kind of like what you were saying, it would be nice to know, you know, if there are partners that want to give, you know, sort of a rationale behind their options, like we can create like a little form, like a little feedback form, so that it has this information and it says, you know, if you're a partner that wasn't here, you want them to sort of share how you feel about the decision here, and then it can be sort of a publicly, you know, position statement, but also for like the partners that were here, if you want to offer up explanations, then again, then, you know, we'll have some sort of record for more of that. You know, I can easily set that up.
I think my intent is to have I will share this information with them in advance, but I do think that if, especially given like the level of participation of some of those entities, I think it's only fair to offer them at least like some opportunity to talk about these things. We'll absolutely record it, whether it's a form that they fill out that Blake helps develop, or record sort of the feedback that they've offered there to be able to share with you all. There will be a summary of it. That's fine. Because I haven't shared sort of the information that I know, from meeting all of these things before. You're right. I did, because I viewed those as one-on-one conversations where people could speak freely. But yes, we can get something in writing. That's doable. Everybody clear on the path forward? Everyone feel like we've accurately represented conversation today?
Do these statements reflect the outcome?
Yes. Yeah.
Someone raise their hand. Yes. Chris Anastasio said yes.
I said yes.
Yeah.
We did it by 12.
Thank you all.
Yeah. It's that scene when Bill Murray wakes up but doesn't hear that